Just a couple of days ago, I put out my favorite top 12 fantasy football kickers for the fantasy football playoffs. And literally a couple hours after that, Trevor Lawrence went down to injury. Brandon McManus was in the top 3 kickers of the fantasy football playoffs. And I gotta tell you, without Trevor Lawrence, there's no Brandon McManus up there. The kicker position is so much dependent on how the offense that they play for runs for them and how often they can get down there. And of course, this is just the perfect example of how things change in fantasy football just like that. So this week, as I do every week, we're going through the top 12 kickers in fantasy football for week 14. And I am the only fantasy football YouTuber who covers kickers on a weekly basis. So please go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Let's go ahead and just dive right into this right now. So the first guy up here, I think that he really just belongs here. From now on moving forward, Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. He's taking on the Philadelphia Eagles this week in Dallas. And I got to tell you, just by looking at the numbers here, you can see that he's an elite fantasy kicker. He's one of the 2 kickers remaining, averaging double-digit fantasy points per game. That's really good stuff there. There's only 2 kickers now that are doing those type of numbers, and Brandon Aubrey is one of them. This guy is in the perfect offense for this, because as you'll see as we continue to go throughout these rankings right here, you're going to see that Brandon Aubrey is in a unique offense that is kicking both field goal attempts and extra point attempts on a very consistent basis every game. Why? Because Dallas' offense is freaking rolling right now. Every time they get the ball, they're like, I haven't seen their punter in a long time. To put it that way, it's either Brandon Aubrey or it's in the end zone. So Brandon Aubrey against the Philadelphia Eagles in a matchup that I think could easily see both of these teams scoring 30 points. I want Brandon Aubrey all freaking day long. Matt Gay at number 2 here, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. Now, Matt Gay, I've really been big on Matt Gay all year. If you've been with my channel for the duration of the season for the past couple of months, you'll know that Matt Gay has consistently been inside this top 12. He's just a simply very good fantasy football kicker. That's just the bottom line. He's a very good kicker in fantasy football. Look at his numbers on the screen. Again, he's not one of the only 2 that's averaging 10 fantasy points per game, but he's right there knocking on the door. Matt Gay is, again, the perfect offense for this. About as many field goal attempts as he had extra point attempts, and he's missed 4 field goal attempts, which is, not great, but we know he has the leg with a 57-yarder, and he's perfect on his extra point attempts as well. So Matt Gay in a matchup versus Cincinnati, I actually think this one has a chance to be a low-key, high-scoring matchup. Give me Matt Gay. Give me Matt Gay any week, but especially in this particular week. Justin Tucker at number 3 here, taking on the Los Angeles Rams in Baltimore. Justin Tucker is, it's so funny. I've been discussing this the past month or so. With Justin Tucker, he started out the year as one of the worst fantasy football kickers. One of the worst. Now, he's since recovered because Baltimore's offense is like Dallas's a little bit. It's rolling right now. But Justin Tucker, you can see on the screen, there's definite concerns there. The guy has missed 6 kicks this year. If you're new to football, I would never expect anyone to know this because he's a kicker. But Justin Tucker is a Hall of Fame kicker if I've ever seen one. He's a lock to be in the Hall of Fame as a kicker. Let's just say this though, he hasn't been very good this year. He simply has not been. Now, of course he can still make kicks. Of course he still goes on streaks where he's really accurate. But he also has misses that he never would have missed 5 years ago. Justin Tucker's longest kick has been 50 yards this year. Is Justin Tucker slowing down? Maybe. But in this matchup against the Rams, I don't think it really matters that much because as long as Justin Tucker gets the opportunities, which he does, he's going to be fine. And that's exactly the way I feel about him this week. Blake Grupe at number 4 here, of the New Orleans Saints, taking on the Carolina Panthers in New Orleans this week. Now, Blake Grupe, I've been discussing him for months now at this point as well. Blake Grupe is, again, in a great offense. It's similar to Indianapolis a little bit. Except you can see that his field goals are outscoring the number of attempts he's getting. New Orleans offense is just, it really is one of the best offenses for a fantasy kicker. This offense is talented. They've got the weapons to get you down there, but their offense is actually a train wreck. Like, they're a talented train wreck that gets you there, but they implode a lot of the time. And a lot of times, that makes it a great opportunity for Blake Grupe. If we can just get the guy to make all of his kicks, we're going to be in great shape. The guy's averaging over 9 fantasy points per game because of the fact that he gets so many opportunities. Blake Grupe, if he can just keep being more consistent, we're going to have a really good fantasy kicker on our hands here. Evan McPherson at number 5 of the Cincinnati Bengals is back. He is back, returning for, I think, his 3rd or 4th time this year. And he's taking on the Indianapolis Colts. So, I'll tell you this. What really stood out to me last week when the Cincinnati Bengals took on the Jacksonville Jaguars is their offense looked so much more efficient than I thought it would. And you know that they're not going to convert every time they're down there because they just don't have Joe Burrow. Now, they've still got the weapons. They've got Jamar Chase, a superstar. They've got T. Higgins, who wasn't really involved last week, but is still a threat. Tyler Boyd is a threat. They've got Joe Mixon. Like, they've got weapons to get you there. There's a chance this offense could be like New Orleans for this final stretch of the season. I don't think that Jake Browning's going to be that good anymore. Like, I think we just saw that peak. And I think that Indianapolis defense, although I love them in fantasy, is not a great real-life defense as far as stopping their opponents to few yards. They're a bend but don't break defense that's opportunistic. But Evan McPherson, the guy, when given the opportunity, is a very good kicker. So I've got Evan McPherson comfortably here at number 5. One spot over Dustin Hopkins of the Cleveland Browns versus the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. And I touched on it last week. You know, it's actually kind of sad a little bit. Like, what's happened to Dustin Hopkins is none of his own doing. It really isn't. Like, even though he's missed five kicks this year, none of these issues he's having right now are of his fault. He's kicked a 58-yard long. He's got the leg. He's largely accurate, and he's averaging just under 11 fantasy points per game. This guy is still the number 1 kicker in fantasy from a fantasy point total as far as the whole season goes, and as far as fantasy points per game go. But I mean, Dustin Hopkins, it's so hard to trust. Is Joe Flacco the starter again this week? It actually kind of looks like it. Is there a chance Dorian Thompson-Robinson comes back? There absolutely is. So, yeah, there's issues here with Hopkins. And versus Jacksonville, I like the matchup, but he's going to remain inside the top 10 most of the time right now. But I'm definitely on watch right now because I don't love what I'm seeing and what the opportunities might be for him in the next coming weeks. Jake Elliott at number 7, taking on the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas this week. In that Philadelphia matchup, when you look at Jake Elliott, again, this is why I discuss fantasy football in terms of 4 quarters. At the beginning of the season, for the first month, Jake Elliott was the undisputed number 1 kicker in fantasy. He was the easiest number 1 kicker you got, averaging like 12 fantasy points per game. It was ridiculous. But now you can see on the screen that their offense is just simply running more efficiently. They're scoring more touchdowns than field goals. That field goal percentage is really starting to lose traction to that touchdown percentage. And that matters. I mean, that's why you see guys like we're going to talk about here in a little bit not be on this list for a while when they were really good kickers at the beginning. That's Elliott's problem. But it just comes down to when you've got a matchup that's this high scoring upside, I want pretty much every fantasy option available. And Jake Elliott is one of those guys. Will Lutz of the Denver Broncos taking on the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles this week. Will Lutz is kind of hard to figure out right now. And I don't think he's missed 4 kicks this year. It's not because I don't think he's a good kicker. He is a good kicker. And he has been for years. But Denver's offense, how do they respond after that loss to Houston? I mean, they were one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest, in all of football leading into last week. How does this shake out for Will Lutz? That's the thing I'm concerned about, is that Is this Denver offense going to run as efficiently as they were, or are they going to kind of get in their own heads and not run as efficiently? I actually worry about that with Russell Wilson a little bit. So, against the Chargers, divisional matchups always good for fantasy kickers. I like this matchup. I think he's got potential to kick 3 or 4 field goals in this game. And if that happens, if you get a couple of them or they're 40 yards, you're going to end up with a double-digit fantasy performance from Will Lutz. And I've got Cam Dicker in the same, in the same area. Cameron Dicker is one spot behind him versus the Denver Broncos. And again, it comes down to divisional matchup, being able to play in an in-division game where there's going to be stops, there's going to be a lot of unpredictable things that a lot of times lessen the chances that you're going to get into the end zone and leave it up to your kicker to make it happen. So Cameron Dicker's just in that category right now. And Cameron Dicker has been, as you can see on the screen, a pretty good kicker in fantasy football. Now, week to week, they could see 6 points like they did last week. This offense is not smooth sailing. But this particular week in a divisional matchup, I'll take the chances here. Harrison Butker at 10, taking on the Buffalo Bills. This is, again, it comes down to the matchup where it was with Jake Elliott and with Brandon Aubrey. This game has the potential to see both teams score 30 points. Easily could be done. So if that's the case, give me a guy like Harrison Butker any day. Because Harrison Butker is literally perfect right now. Harrison Butker is absolutely freaking perfect. You don't see that much. You do not see that very much. So while, yes, the Chiefs offense has been disappointing this year, and while, yes, there's been actually less scoring opportunities, give me a matchup like this where they both have potential to score 30. I'll take that guy. And then Jake Moody and Tyler Bass rounding it out. Jake Moody making a return this week versus the Seattle Seahawks, and Tyler Bass at the Kansas City Chiefs. Jake Moody, as I discussed with Jake Elliott, was a top 5 fantasy kicker for most of the first month of the fantasy season. Easily top 5. But of course, you can see on the screen, those touchdowns and the extra point attempts have significantly pulled away from the field goal attempts. That's a big deal. That's huge for fantasy kickers. The closer you can get to that balance is when you have a good fantasy kicker at your hands. That's why a lot of these middle tier teams have great fantasy kickers. Where Jake Moody in this matchup versus Seattle, I think there's obviously the divisional component to it. Now, they crushed the Seahawks first time they played. But I do think that with this many scoring opportunities for Jake Moody right now, I'll take it in a divisional matchup. And then Tyler Bass, again, like I said with Harrison Butker, against the Kansas City Chiefs, I just want in on all the scoring potential that is there for all of these fantasy options. It's plain and simple, just like that. That's just the bottom line here. So I got Tyler Bass at 12, Jake Moody at 11. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for Week 14 Fantasy Football. And if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for Week 14 Fantasy Football, click on this video right here.